Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I'm a Tolkien scholar. That means that I'm here to answer your questions about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, anything at all, whether it's about The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or The Silmarillion or any of his other stories or about Tolkien himself. And we don't have as many questions this time, even though I didn't get to do a question and answer video last week. Let me just explain all that. I had a shoulder snafu. My shoulder went out. Just woke up in a lot of pain one day. I've had that happen with my back, but never with my shoulder before, so it was sort of interesting. And that kind of put a dampening on things for a few days, and then I re-injured it. I was getting better. I was starting to feel better, and then I had to wrap presents for Christmas. So I am doing that. It just re-injured the shoulder, and it was really bad again. So I had a very interesting holiday. It was rough. So between the shoulder being bad and me not being able to really look at many questions or go through a lot on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, there weren't as many questions. So I have 12 picked out for you here, and of course we're going to do a reading. Now let's get to that. I kind of promised that I would read a bit from the Children of Húrin. And the Children of Húrin is probably my favorite Tolkien story, and it's just really good. And I read a little bit as part of an answer of the conversation between Húrin and Morgoth, and I said I should do a reading of the greater part of that, give the whole conversation. And I'm not going to read the entire chapter, which is the words of Húrin and Morgoth, but I'm going to read the entire bit that includes their conversation. So here we go. Therefore Húrin was brought before Morgoth, for Morgoth knew by his arts and his spies that Húrin had the friendship of the king, and he sought to daunt him with his eyes. But Húrin could not yet be daunted, and he defied Morgoth. Therefore Morgoth had him chained and set in slow torment. But after a while he came to him and offered him his choice, to go free whither he would, or receive power and rank as the greatest of Morgoth's captains, if he would but reveal where Turgon hid his stronghold, and aught else that he knew of the king's counsels. But Húrin the Steadfast mocked him, saying, Blind you are, Morgoth Baudlir, and blind ever shall be, seeing only the dark. You know not what rules the hearts of men, and if you knew you would not give it. But a fool is he who accepts what Morgoth offers. You will take first the price, and then withhold the promise, and I should get only death if I told you what you ask. Then Morgoth laughed, and he said, Death you may yet crave of me as a boon. Then he took Húrin to the Howth en Nerneath, and it was then new built, and the reek of death was upon it. And Morgoth set Húrin upon its top, and bade him look west towards Hithlum, and think of his wife and his son and other kin. For they dwell now in my realm, said Morgoth, and they are at my mercy. You have none, answered Húrin. But you will not come at Turgon through them, for they do not know his secrets. Then wrath mastered Morgoth, and he said, Yet I may come at you, and all your accursed house, and you shall be broken on my will, though you were all made of steel. And he took up a long sword that lay there, and broke it before the eyes of Húrin, and a splinter wounded his face, but Húrin did not blench. Then Morgoth, stretching out his long arm towards Dor-lómin, cursed Húrin and Morwen and their offspring, saying, Behold, the shadow of my thought shall lie upon them wherever they go, and my hate shall pursue them to the ends of the world. But Húrin said, You speak in vain, for you cannot see them, nor govern them from afar, not while you keep the shape, and desire still to be king visible upon this earth. Then Morgoth turned upon Húrin, and he said, Fool, little among men, and they are the least of all that speak. Have you seen the Valar, or measured the power of Manwë and Varda? Do you know the reach of their thought? Or do you perhaps think that their thought is upon you, and that they may shield you from afar? I know not, said Húrin. Yet so it might be if they willed, for the elder king shall not be dethroned while Arda endures. You say it, said Morgoth. I am the elder king, Melkor, first and mightiest of all the Valar, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that it is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom. and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel, whatsoever they shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death. But Húrin answered, Do you forget to whom you speak? Such things you spoke long ago to our fathers, but we escaped from your shadow. And now we have knowledge of you, for we have looked on the faces that have seen the light, and heard the voices that have spoken with Manwë. Before Arda you were, but others also, and you did not make it. Neither are you the most mighty, for you have spent your strength upon yourself and wasted in your own emptiness. No more are you now than an escaped thrall of the Valar, and their chain still awaits you. You have learned the lessons of your masters by rote, said Morgoth. But such childish lore will not help you. Now they are all fled away. This last then I say to you, Thrall Morgoth, said Húrin, and it comes not from the lore of the Eldar, but is put into my heart in this hour. You are not the lord of men, and shall not be, though all Arda and Manel fall in your dominion. Beyond the circles of the world you shall not pursue those who refuse you. Beyond the circles of the world I will not pursue them, said Morgoth. For beyond the circles of the world there is nothing. But within them they shall not escape me, until they enter into nothing. You lie, said Húrin. You shall see, and you shall confess that I do not lie, said Morgoth. And taking Húrin back to Angband, he set him in a chair of stone upon a high place of Thangorodrim, from which he could see afar the land of Hithlum in the west and the lands of Beleriand in the south. There he was bound by the power of Morgoth, and Morgoth, standing beside him, cursed him again, and set his power upon him, so that he could not move from that place nor die, until Morgoth should release him. Sit now there, said Morgoth, and look out upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those you have delivered to me. For you have dared to mock me, and have questioned the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore with my eyes you shall see, and with my ears you shall hear, and nothing should be hidden from you. Which was actually not true. Plenty was hidden from Húrin when he watched the story play out from there, because Morgoth showed him all the bad things. And I'm not saying that he didn't show him the good things, because there really were no good things that happened to Turin, his son, especially. But he showed him all the bad things, but none of the things that Turin himself had done to cause all of this to happen. Because Turin was sort of the victim of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. He was told that he was cursed by Morgoth, and he acted in the fashion of one who was cursed by Morgoth, and that fostered the curse and made his life worse. A lot of the bad things that happened to Turin were his own fault, or at least exacerbated by him, by his rashness, by his occasional impetuousness, by his wrath, by his lack of patience, by his lack of understanding. And in acting in this way, he caused terrible things to happen to him. And of course, Morgoth showed those things to Húrin, his father, but did not show him all the things that Húrin had done. For example, one of the things that Húrin did after escaping from Thangorodrim is he went to Mim and he slayed Mim, the dwarf, the petty dwarf, because from his perspective, all he saw was that Turin lived in the house of Mim, and then Mim betrayed him and attacked him. And that's all he saw. He did not see that Turin caused Mim's son to die, and that Turin was holding him ransom, and he pretty much forced his way into his home, and that he was living with this band of vagabonds, So he saw a lot, but he didn't see everything. He saw enough to make him believe that the curse of Morgoth was real, and that it was happening, and that it was causing all of this. And he didn't see how Turin had caused a lot of it. But anyway, let's get to your questions. Like I said, I think we have 12. Let me count them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yep, we have 12. So it's not a lot, but we can get through them. Let's see. So this first question is, how did Gollum make it out of Moria without the Fellowship catching him? The Fellowship were a little distracted at the time. While it is true that Gollum he had been hiding in Moria for some time. After coming out of Mordor, he went to Moria and he stayed there. He liked it. It was dark. It was damp. There were a lot of places he could hide. I guess there was food there as well. So it was to his liking. It was not unlike when he hid under the Misty Mountains. And there were orcs down there, and there was a Balrog down there, but Moria was big enough where he could stay in an area where there were no orcs and there was no Balrog. So he had been there, and of course he started following the Fellowship as they came through there, and he came out because they came out. And you would wonder, well, why didn't they notice that he was following them? Because of everything that happened. Gandalf just died. They were being chased by a host of orcs. He didn't really die, of course. We know he died 11 days later, but as far as they were concerned, he was gone. They were trying to get out quickly. They were blinded by fear and by grief. There was no way that they were ever going to notice Gollum, who was quite sneaky. So they noticed him later. Aragorn and Frodo both noticed that they were being followed by Gollum. So there you have it. Okay, next question. Let's see. Is it true that orcs are afraid of fire? If so, what is the reason for this fear, and what happens when they are burned by it? It's not true. It's not true. At least it's not true in the way that you're thinking. I think anybody should have a healthy fear of fire. Fire burns you. Fire can harm you. But orcs are not any more afraid of fire than anyone else would be. Like I said, you should have a healthy fear of fire. But suggesting that the orcs specifically fear fire, to me, is saying that they have a weakness, that they're weak to fire, or that they're more afraid of fire than men would be, or elves, or dwarves, or hobbits. That's not the case, and this actually came up in The Hobbit. After Thorin's party escaped from Goblin Town, they were beset upon by wargs. The wargs chased them out. And they wound up being chased up trees, and they had all these dwarves and one hobbit and a wizard in the trees, and the wargs were sort of all around them. And Gandalf was lighting acorns on fire and throwing them down like fireballs at the wargs, and it was mentioned that wargs are particularly afraid of fire, which makes sense. They have fur, they can catch a blaze very easily. However, when the orcs came, they didn't have any particular fear of fire. They laughed. They started setting fires of their own. They started setting the trees on fire. So, that was very bad. And now they were stuck in trees and that were being lit on fire. Thankfully, the eagles came by. But that's what happened. So it was really the wargs that were afraid of fire, not the orcs. And as to why wargs specifically would be afraid of fire, well, they're wolves. They're covered with flammable fur. So, okay, next question. This one came in from a Stuart Schiffman who asks, why didn't the dwarves take part in the defense of Gondor, the Battle of Pelennor Fields? They kind of had their own thing going on. I mean, Gimli was there, but or at least he arrived along with Aragorn later on in the battle, but the heroes of the story, the Fellowship, the Fellowship is formed in the northern part of Middle-earth, in Imladris, Rivendell. And then once they travel into the south, the story goes with them. The focus of the story goes to the south, to Gondor, Rohan, and Mordor. There's still things going on in the north, in Rhovanion and Eriador and all these lands. Sauron's forces, Easterlings, coming out of Rhûn, which is to the east of Rhovanion, were attacking. They were invading Rhovanion, and they were being repelled by the forces of Dale, which were men, and the forces of Erebor, which were dwarves. So the dwarves were fighting their own war. Their king, Dane II Ironfoot, was killed in this battle, although he took a lot of orcs with him. King Brand, who was Bard's grandson of Dale, also was killed in that battle. Of course, the Easterlings lost their focus and wound up fleeing once the One Ring had been destroyed. So there you have it. Okay, next question. What was the relationship between Thorin and Balin and Dwalin? Did they have a common ancestor? So, yeah, Balin and Dwalin are brothers, and the relation to Thorin is they are his third cousins. So because they're third cousins, they of course do have a common ancestor. You have to go back 4 generations to get to that. So let's trace that lineage. So you go from Thorin II Oakenshield. His father was Thrain II. His grandfather was Thror, and his great-grandfather was Dane the First. Then we go one further, Dane's father. That would be Thorin's great-great-grandfather. That's the common ancestor. That's Nain the Second. So Balin and Dwalin are descended from Nain the Second, but from his other son. Not Nain's son, Dane the First, but Nain's other son, Farin. Now, Farin had two sons. One was Fundin and one was Groin. Fundin is the father of Balin and Dwalin. Groin is the father of Oin and Gloin. And the grandfather of Gimli. I think I might have skipped a generation there on that side, but it doesn't matter. They're of the same generation, but that's how you would trace it back through Thorin's. I think I might have screwed up on Farin, but definitely on the side that Thorin descends. I know I'm right on that. So they're third cousins, is what I'm getting at. So they do have a common ancestor. That would be Nain the Second. Okay, next question. This is the one from the thumbnail. What characters were in the Lord of the Rings book, but not in the Lord of the Rings films? Okay, let's take a deep breath. I'm not going to be able to say it all in one breath, but let me list them. Tom Bombadil is a big one. Tom Bombadil and his wife Goldberry, they were completely left out. There was no trace of them whatsoever. I believe at one point in the early version of the films, he was in the script, and they may have even cast someone as Tom Bombadil, but then they decided not to film those scenes. That would also mean that there's no Old Man Willow and there's no Barrow Wight. Fatty Bolger is almost completely cut out. You kind of see him from behind. I think Bilbo says his name. He doesn't really have any lines. He's not part of the Hobbit conspiracy. They don't even really get into the Hobbit conspiracy other than Sam. So his whole part is cut out. They cut out Crick Hollow, and they had Frodo leave directly from Hobbiton, from Bag End. So I guess there was no need for Fatty in that sense. Since everybody knew Frodo was leaving, he didn't need to leave a decoy behind. Lobelia Sackville Baggins, she's in the extended cut. Most of her scenes, though, from the book are not there. Her husband and her son are pretty much absent. Sam's father, Hamfast Gamgee, he is only in the extended cut, and I don't think he really has any lines. Most of his scenes were cut. We don't get to see him speak with the Nazgul, so there's not a lot of him. Farmer Maggot, they mention him, and there's one line of dialogue I think you hear from him. I think you might see like the top of his hat or something like that. They talk about him, but he's greatly cut down. They don't stay at his house. He doesn't feed them. He doesn't bring them to the ferry. So that's just completely absent. And that makes sense because he was bringing them to Crick Hollow, and Frodo wasn't going to Crick Hollow in the movie. So while they did cut through his field and they talked about the mushrooms and all that, they really didn't have Farmer Maggot as a character. Skipping ahead a little bit, Prince Imrahil of Gondor and all of the Swan Knights who came to Gondor after the beacons were lit and took part in the Battle of Pelennor, and also marched with Aragorn to the Black Gate. Prince Imrahil was a pretty major character that was introduced late in the story, and that's probably why they cut him out, because he was introduced late in the story. He's not part of it. The Ents, the only named Ent that we get is Treebeard. Also, there was the guy that got lit on fire and put himself out in the water. In the book, he didn't put himself out in the water. I think he died. He had a name which is not coming to me right now. I think it might have been Broadbeam or something like. No, that's a type of dwarf. But it was something kind of interesting. But the one Ent that was kind of an important character that was cut out was Quickbeam, who had a lot of lines, and he was the one that sort of took care of Merry and Pippin while Treebeard was at the Entmoot. Elrond's sons were left out. Elladan and Elrohir, they're not in it, as well as the Grey Company, all of the Dunedain that came with them into the south and joined Aragorn and took the Pass of the Dead with him. Speaking of Ranger, Halbarad, he was one of the Grey Company. Halbarad died in the Battle of Pelennor Fields. He was said to be a kinsman of Aragorn. He was probably related to him in some way, but he's completely left out of the movie. Glorfindel. Now, Glorfindel is interesting because there have been two adaptations of the Fellowship of the Ring that made it to movie theaters. One was a cartoon from Ralph Bakshi, and the other was a live-action film from Peter Jackson. and they both left out Glorfindel but kept his scenes. They just replaced him with another elf. In Ralph Bakshi's film, they replaced Glorfindel with Legolas, and in Peter Jackson's film, they gave that part to Arwen. Galdor was another elf that had some lines, and he was a named elf. He was important in the Council of Elrond, and he was left off. And then there was Eristor, who I believe was coming from Lindon, so he was one of Círdan's people. He was another one that was important, really just in that one scene. There were some elves kind of wandering around that may have been Galdor or Eristor. There was a guy named Figwit, which is interesting. There's a whole story behind Figwit, which I'm not going to get into. But Gildor and Glorian. Again, there is a part in the film where it's early on, and the hobbits see some elves walking through the forest. One of them may have been Gildor, but they don't stop and speak with them. They're not fed by them. They don't get advice from Gildor. Gildor doesn't show up at the end of Return of the King when Frodo is sailing west. He was supposed to be there, so he's just left out. Radagast the Brown. He would have appeared only in a flashback scene, or they could have inserted that scene into the movie, I guess, at the point where it would have happened, but they left him out completely. He was just mentioned in The Hobbit, but they made him a character in The Hobbit, whereas he was actually in The Lord of the Rings, at least a minor role, and they left him out completely. Erkenbrand was left out. He was the Lord of the Westfold, and he was believed to be dead, and then Gandalf went off and found him and his men and brought them to Helm's Deep. They pretty much just gave that part to Éomer, so they left out Erkenbrand completely. Elendil's son, Anarion, from the beginning, he wouldn't have been there during the battle. The reason I'm mentioning it is because Anarion died before Elendil and Gil-galad fought Sauron. He died during the siege about a year before. The reason I mention Anarion is because he's not really mentioned. I think Denethor might have had a line where he said the House of Anarion. But the reason I mentioned that Anarion is cut out is because of the statues, the Argonath statues that we see in the book were Isildur and Anarion, and they changed it in the movie to Isildur and Elendil, so they kind of cut Anarion out of being even a statue. Beregond was sort of in the movie, but they called him Irolas, and his son was left out. His son Burgle was not in it. Burgle showed Pippin around the city. They became friends. Gonburigan and the entire clan of wild men of the mountains were left out. The Dunlendings were mostly left out. The Easterlings are only in the extended cut. Many of the hobbits that appeared during the Scouring of the Shire was left out because they didn't do the Scouring of the Shire, so no Tom Cotton, no Will Whitfoot. Bill Ferny, he might have been one of those weirdo dudes in the Prancing Pony and Bree, but he didn't have any lines. He didn't sell them the pony. It's just, he was pretty much cut out. And Hirgon, who was a man of Gondor that brought the Red Arrow to Rohan to tell them that Gondor needed aid. Of course, they weren't doing the Red Arrow. They repurposed the beacons, so we didn't really need Hirgon, I guess. Hirgon got killed anyway. So that's all the ones that I can come up with. And looking through the comments, nobody mentioned anybody else that I had missed, so I think I got them all. All right, next question. This one came in from Peter Ramirez, who asks, in The Lord of the Rings, at the end of the Two Towers, after Frodo is stung by Shelob and Sam followed the orcs who took Frodo, Sam hears Gorbag tell Shagrat something has slipped. What exactly has slipped that caused Sauron concern? So I think to answer this question, the first thing we have to do is take that quote, that something has slipped quote, and put it into its full context. So I'm going to read you that part of the Two Towers here. You should try being up here with Shelob for company, said Shagrat. I'd like to try somewhere where there's none of them. But the war is on now. And when that's over, things may be easier. It's going well, they say. They would, grunted Gorbag. We'll see. But anyway, if it does go well, there should be a lot more room. What do you say? If we get a chance, you and me'll slip off and set up somewhere on our own with a few trusty lads. Somewhere where there's good loot, nice and handy, and no big bosses. Ah, said Shagrat, like old times. Yes, said Gorbag, but don't count on it. I'm not easy in my mind, as I said. The big bosses, eh? His voice sank almost to a whisper. Even the biggest can make mistakes. Something nearly slipped, you say. I say something has slipped. And we've got to look out. Always the poor Uruks to put slips right and small thanks. But don't forget, the enemies don't love him. The enemies don't love us any more than they love him. And if they get topsides on him, we're done too. But see here. When were you ordered out? About an hour ago, just before you saw us. A message came. Nazgul uneasy. Spies feared and stares. Double vigilance. Patrol to head of stairs. I came at once. Bad business, said Gorbog. See here, our silent watchers were uneasy more than 2 days ago, that I know of. But my patrol wasn't ordered out for another day. Nor any message sent to Ludbur's either, owing to the great signal going up and the high Nazgul going on to the way and all that. And then they couldn't get Ludbur's to pay attention for a good while, I'm told. The eye was busy elsewhere, I suppose, said Shagrat. Big things going away west, they say. I dare say, growled Gorbog. But in the meantime, enemies have got up the stairs. And what were you up to? You're supposed to keep watch, weren't you? Special orders or no? What are you for? So, in the latter parts of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien made an effort to somewhat humanize the orcs. We get conversations. They're still villains, but instead of these nameless, faceless thugs, they have names, they have personalities, they have their own thoughts, they have their own emotions. Part of their emotions and everything was their fear and their anxiety about the war, and that they wished to get out of the war. If it looked like Sauron might lose, they figured that the guys on the other side, they hate us just as much as they hate Sauron. And they were starting to see that Sauron was in this position where he could possibly lose. The Nazgul are uneasy. Spies are in Mordor. Sauron is nervous about something. They don't know what it is. It's the conversation that he had with Aragorn in the Palantir. But even down to the lowliest foot soldier, they feel it when the top guy starts to get nervous. Things start to fall apart a little bit. He's not as confident. They feel desperate. So that's what that's about. Okay, next question. Saruman called Radagast the Brown a fool. Was he wrong? And how would he feel about the two blue wizards that vanished and never appeared again? Of course, Saruman was wrong about Radagast, but he had a point. If Radagast was a fool, so to speak, it was because he had been fooled by Saruman. And in this case, all of the White Council were fools as well, because they were all under Saruman's spell. All of the council, Gandalf included, trusted Saruman and were guided by his wisdom, and they were all betrayed by him. Radagast was used as a patsy to lure Gandalf to Isengard, and in trying to foster friendship, Radagast had taught Saruman the skill of speaking to birds, which Saruman used for his own foul purposes, the Crabine out of Isengard. It is improper, I think, to blame Radagast or to blame Gandalf or to blame anyone else for Saruman's actions. But from his perspective, from the perspective of Saruman, they're all fools. The Blue Wizards, they're not really all that mentioned in the Lord of the Rings main text. They're acknowledged in the sense that Saruman does say that there are 5 wizards. We don't have a lot to work with in trying to say what Saruman's opinions on them would have been. But we can make some rational assumptions based on what is there. In putting together the Istari project, so to speak, the first 2 volunteers were Kuramo, that's Saruman, and Alatar, that's Morenatar, he's one of the Blue Wizards. Now, this may suggest that because they came together, they came forward at the same time, that perhaps they were colleagues, or perhaps they were friends, or they knew each other in some way, or maybe they just had similar thoughts. They had the same temperament, maybe. Alatar asked to take his close friend Palando with him. That's Ramostano the Blue. And Aloran, that's Gandalf the Grey, he was basically picked out by Manwë, and he didn't want to go. He was mandated to go. And then Iwendel, that's Radagast, he was brought in by Yavanna. So the dynamics suggest that the white and the blue were the first to sort of jump on the idea of going to Middle-earth. Now, in the early drafts of the story, Saruman traveled with the blue wizards to the east and to the south when they all arrived, which also suggests a kinship, that they decided to go to these lands behind enemy lines that Sauron had occupied and conquered, and that Saruman went with them. But he returned, and they did not. Now, in the later revisions, the blue guys came earlier. They came in the Second Age along with Glorfindel, but Saruman still, even though he arrived in the Third Age, still went to those same lands. He might have been looking for them, or he might have just had the same idea that they had, that it was necessary to do that. Now, getting in the head of Saruman is a bit of a dangerous task, I would say, but the blue guys are hardly characters at all. It's difficult to say with any authority what his opinions actually were, but just based on what I've talked about, he probably liked them. That's what it seemed to me, or at least did in the past. They had been long gone by the time the Lord of the Rings happens. Okay, next questions. Let's see. How many dragons helped Sauron during the War of the Ring? 0 dragons took part in the War of the Ring. Dragons are not really a big thing in Middle-earth during the War of the Ring. Most of them lived far to the north, where there weren't really a lot of people. They were also greatly diminished in size and power from the dragons of the First Age, the Great Dragons. Smaug was sort of the last of the Great Dragons. He was still kind of big, kind of powerful. Nothing compared to the First Age dragons, but he was sort of the last hurrah for dragons, and he was dead. Gandalf had this thought, though, that Sauron might recruit Smaug, which is why he helped Thorin and coordinated Thorin's quest with his own to banish Sauron from Mirkwood. When Sauron went to Mordor and later declared himself openly, he sent out a call. Think of it like a pulse, that all manner of dark creatures should come to Mordor, and he pulled in orcs and trolls and wicked men. Even Gollum came, but no dragons came. So there weren't any dragons during the war. I mean, there were they existed, they just didn't take part in the war. Okay, so here's one that I get this question a lot, so we're going to address this here in a video. In The Lord of the Rings, what is the difference between goblins, orcs, and uruks? Okay, so the only difference is linguistics. They're all the same thing. When you say goblin, orc, uruk, you're just saying the same thing in different languages. Uruk is the name that they call themselves in the Black Speech of Mordor, which is derived from Adunaic, which was a language out of Numenor, which is, they called them Urku. Orc is derived from Elvish. In Quenya, it's Orco or Urko, and in Middle-earth well, it's Orco in traditional Quenya. In Middle-earth Quenya, it's more like Urku. In Sindarin, they're called Orch. In Westron, it's Orc, whether with a C or with a K. Now, Bilbo, though, translated Orc as goblin when he wrote his book, and that's how it appears in The Hobbit. But they are also called Gorgun by the wild men. This may be a linguistic in-universe origin for the term goblin. Another answer to this question, somebody else mentioned subspecies, hobgoblins, snaga, snufflers. While it is true that there are different clans of orcs and different types of uruks, hobgoblins really is a size thing. It's just big orc. That's what it means. And that they're not to be confused with uruk-hai, which are hybrids of orcs and men. Snaga is sort of a derisive term that means slave. That's what the uruk-hai referred to the Mordor uruks as. It's like a slur. Snufflers do seem to be a specific type of orc. They have darker skin, they're small, and they have a very strong sense of smell. Aragorn mentions all different types of orcs in the Two Towers, though he doesn't call them by their different names, just points of origin, but they're all orcs nonetheless. Now, when I originally posted this, there was a comment from somebody, a fellow named Anthony, who says that, I'm just going to read his comment out. He says, I've said this before, but I still don't believe goblins are orcs. If that were true, the dynamics between the goblins and dwarves in The Hobbit would have been different. There was too much bad blood. Orcs would have killed the dwarves straight away or perhaps tortured them. I'd accept subspecies, but not the same, but that's only my opinion. Now, of course he's wrong. There's sort of two different reasons he's wrong. One of them was covered by somebody else who replied and said, orcs don't really have a strong sense of communal identity. You don't need different species, just different groups with different histories. The orcs in The Hobbit are not the same as the orcs in The Fall of Gondolin, so they really don't have these sort of like connections like that. But there was one thing that, and I'm just going to read you this little bit of The Hobbit, not the story itself, but the foreword. It's literally right there in The Hobbit. I'm going to read you what J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in his foreword. This is a story of long ago. At that time, the languages and letters were quite different from ours of today. English is used to represent the languages, but 2 points may be noted. 1. In English, the only correct plural of dwarf is dwarfs, and the adjective is dwarfish. In this story, dwarves and dwarvish are used, but only when speaking of the ancient people to whom Thorin Oakenshield and his companions belonged. 2. Orc is not an English word. It occurs in 1 or 2 places, but is usually translated goblin or hobgoblin for the larger kinds. Orc is the hobbit's form of the name given at that time to these creatures, and it is not connected at all with our orc applied to sea animals or of dolphin kind. So basically, it's right there in The Hobbit. Right from the very beginning, goblins are the word goblin translated from orc. That's all it is. Okay, next question. Oh, I like this question. So this is a sort of a hypothetical scenario, and I'm not always a fan of hypothetical scenarios when it comes to Tolkien's work, because it's always like, well, what happens if this guy was here? Or what happens if Gandalf did this thing? But I like this one because it's unique and it's creative. So here it is. Let's say you were magically transported to Middle-earth to fight alongside Gandalf and company, but you forgot your glasses that you really need. What would you do? Now, this hits home for me because I do need my glasses. I would be pretty helpless without them. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and you guys might know this if you've been following the channel and if you followed my playthrough of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings Volume 1 for Super NES. But I'll tell you the story. There's no mention of glasses or any sort of corrective prosthetic for eyes at all during The Lord of the Rings or any other of Tolkien's books regarding the Legendarium, but there was in the video game based on The Lord of the Rings for the Super NES. Now, when I was around 15 or 16 years old, I bought The Lord of the Rings for Super NES because it was The Lord of the Rings. I didn't know anything about the game. I just saw it in the store. It was The Lord of the Rings, and I bought it. I learned my lesson. It's not a good game. It's a mess. But the reason I bring it up is because one of the first things you have to do in the game is to recruit Pippin and Sam. Now, getting Pippin, very easy. You just go and you beat up some wolves, and then he joins you. Sam won't budge until you find his father's glasses. And the glasses are found deep in a cave system full of bats, snakes. There's even some orcs in there. And that's just like one screen to the left of Hobbiton. It really makes you wonder what half-assed Gamgee was getting up to in those caves that he lost his glasses there. Now, this doesn't indicate that there are glasses in Middle-earth. The game was insane. If the game was canon, we would also believe that one of the blue wizards was named Drexel. There was a hobbit named John Galt. There's all sorts of insanity that in that game that has nothing to do with Tolkien. But it shows that someone had to come up with some sort of plot coupon, some sort of device that you would have to fetch to get Sam to join you. And they thought that at the time that glasses were suitable. Now, I don't like to compare Middle-earth to real life because it's very different. It's not realistic. It's fantasy. But it's possible that glasses could have existed in Middle-earth, even though they weren't mentioned. The technology in real life is very early Renaissance period. Bilbo has a clock. Clocks were invented around the 13th century, around the same time that glasses were invented. So, now that's not a surefire way to say that glasses existed, but it is an indication that it is possible. So what would I do? I'm transplanted into Middle-earth. Gandalf's going to be like, "You are to join the Fellowship of the Ring," and I'm like, I can't see. So, what would I do? First of all, I would probably talk to Gandalf or perhaps to Elrond. Elrond would be a good one. And just be like, look, my eyes are not very good. This one, I can see far, but if something's close, it's blurry. This one, everything's blurry from far away. It has to be close. I got this problem, and I would have to describe what glasses are, or I would be like, is there a spell or some sort of elvish magic that could, some sort of healing that could fix my eyes? That would be better than glasses, to not need them at all, to not have to worry about them. If they couldn't do that, I would have to describe what glasses are and how they work, and see if they can come up with some sort of craft that would help me to some sort of replacement. Somebody in the comments a lot of the comments are really good. This guy named Bank said that he thinks the elves would be able to make glasses in just a few days. They would probably make them out of beryl gemstones, which is an interesting thing. Kieran here says that Rivendell has a few surviving Noldorin craftsmen from Eregion and even Beleriand. So even if they never needed glasses, these are the greatest craftsmen of antiquity. They probably could make something. He also mentions gemstones. So, somebody says that there could very well have been glasses in Numenor. Of course, we don't know, but they're theorizing that Numenor may have had technology that they didn't even know about afterwards. Adam here just says that Celebrimbor probably could have made glasses. Of course, he wasn't around at that time during the Lord of the Rings, but yeah. But anyway, let's get on to the next question. I just wanted to read you some of the comments because I thought they were pretty good. So this one came in from Elizabeth McDougall, and I enjoy Elizabeth's questions because they almost always cater to the linguistic side of things, which is what I enjoy the most. These questions don't exactly do the highest numbers on Quora, but I enjoy them. So Elizabeth asks, are the words Eru and Ilúvatar from different languages? No, they're both Quenya. They both refer to God. And you would think, because God has two names, he's Eru and he's Ilúvatar, that it might be the same thing in two different languages. Like one is Quenya and the other is Sindarin. But in this case, they're both Quenya. So Eru is derived from which means one or alone. So Eru is he that is alone or the one. Ilúvatar. Now, as noted in the Silmarillion, that was more popular of a name for God in Middle-earth. And this comes from the Quenya root alluviae. Alluviae means everything. And it's a much more broad application than saying Ea. Ea is the universe. Alluviae is everything that has ever been and everything that ever will be. And then the other part of it is Atar, which means father. So Alluviae and Atar becomes Ilúvatar, father of all, or all father. Tolkien also referred to him in a letter as the one ever present, but he didn't give an Elvish version of that, just English. So, and what's interesting is that Tolkien never gave us any non-Quenya names for Ilúvatar. He was called Eru in Numenor, and probably then in Gondor and Arnor as well. There is no Sindarin, Adonaic, or Westron word for him in Middle-earth. It was said that they called him Ilúvatar. So it's just one of those interesting things where you would expect that there would be a Sindarin word for Ilúvatar, but if there is, we don't know what it is. We don't know, because we could translate the one or father of all into Sindarin and come up with sort of a Neo-Sindarin name for God, but we don't know that the Sindar elves would have called him the one or the father of everything. They may have had a different name that they would have had for him, and we just don't know it. Anyway, let's get to the last question. This one I like too. I feel this one's rather creative. Would Frodo have still left Middle-earth if Rose Cotton had introduced him to one of her Hobbit lady friends, and he ended up falling in love like Samwise does and had a lady to help him mend his heart? Now, I just want to say this is a good question. It's very creative. It's insightful. It's interesting, So let me talk a little bit about Gwyndor and Turin. Gwyndor said that Turin could have been saved from the curse of Morgoth by the love of Finduilas. Is it possible then that Frodo may have been saved from the hurts inflicted upon him by the Witch King, by Shelob, and of course by Sauron, by the love of a Hobbit woman? Maybe Rose Cotton had an older sister, or maybe she knew somebody single that liked Frodo, introduced them, they get together. Maybe something happens. Maybe he gets married. Maybe he has children. Maybe then he becomes more tied to Middle-earth and he doesn't leave. As interesting as that is, I would have to say the answer is probably not, though. It was postulated that if anything could break Turin out of the curse, it was the love of Finduilas. And it was really Thorin himself that perpetuated the curse. We talked about this at the beginning of the video when I read you a bit of the Children of Húrin, that it was Thorin that kept perpetuating it. His belief in the lies of the dragon led to Finduilas' death because he wasn't there to save her. He was told that if he goes to save Finduilas, he'll never see his sister again. That wasn't true, but he believed it. If he had not believed the dragon, he would have saved Finduilas, and in a sense, he would have saved himself and his sister as well. And it would have been a very different ending. In Frodo's case, he didn't have the same control over the situation that Thorin had. All of the harms that were visited on him were external forces. He would feel pain from an old wound, he would feel sick from old venom, and having the One Ring ripped from him was damaging to his psyche. Not even Arwen's jewel really could mend that. It couldn't just alleviate it a little bit, but it couldn't fix him. Some harms are beyond those that even the elves in Middle-earth could heal, and this was what the deal with Frodo was. If his healing was beyond what Gandalf could do or what Elrond could do, then there's nothing in Middle-earth that would heal him fully. His only chance at peace was sailing west. This means essentially that Frodo was denied a normal life, to be married, to have children and such. But this brings me to another thing about Frodo. Frodo was a lot like Bilbo. Bilbo never married. And while the answer to why was never definitively given, Gandalf theorized that he was just not the marrying type. That he would wish to not be tied down, to have the ability to leave at any point, to wander. Frodo was Bilbo's heir, not just because they had shared blood or because they had the same birthday, but they were very much kindred souls. Frodo was unmarried. He was 54 years old at the end of the story, and I don't think he would have married at all, even if he had never gone to Mordor. He was very much of the same type as his older cousin, Bilbo. He was a free spirit, a wanderer at heart. Tolkien was realistic in this sense, with the idea that some people aren't interested in marriage. And it's not because they don't have the chance to be married, they just don't want to. Boromir is a perfect example. Now, if Boromir had become steward, he perhaps would have had to marry out of obligation to produce an heir that would be steward after him. But he had no desire. He was married to Gondor, really. So, and Frodo, in his own way, was married to the Shire, in a sense. And of course, the ring came along and messed that all up. But anyway, guys, that has been all the questions for this week. I will see you guys next year. And if you got all the way to the end of the video, you enjoyed it, right? You wouldn't have watched me talk about all this stuff for nearly 48 minutes if you didn't enjoy it. So if you haven't already, leave me a like, subscribe if you haven't, leave me a comment, share the video around, let other people know about it. See you guys next time.